Hi there, Thor owners. Today in your 2020 Thor Outlaw, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install Sumo Springs for the rear axle. And this is what our Sumo Springs look like when they're installed. It connects between our frame on our vehicle, and then it sits on top of the leaf spring on our rear axle here. And this is going to help us out in just about every aspect of our rear suspension here. Whether it's smoothing out our ride whenever we hit any bumps, this is going to help absorb some of that impact. It's going to work with your shock absorbers and the rest of your suspension to minimize the amount of vibration and impacts you feel inside the vehicle there. That can extend the life of all of these components as well, because some of that is going to be absorbed into this, which is going to relieve stress on the rest of your components here. It's also going to be better for your dishes and other things inside that are vibrating around. A lot of your electronics and things like that as well have small things that can vibrate and break loose, so this can extend the life of that as well. This is also going to assist with supporting the weight of our vehicle here. Now, it doesn't increase the amount that our motorhome can carry, it just helps assist in supporting a lot of that weight. That can help level your vehicle back out if you've got some uneven loads, or if you've got a lot of weight here in the back that's sagging it down. This can help restore some of that lost ride height there. Other benefits you'll receive with these is reduction in sway, because as your motorhome wants to tip to this side, it's going to compress this spring. And as this spring compresses, it wants to return to its normal position here, how we see it now. And the spring can compress up to 80%, providing support throughout that, and the support's going to be dynamic as well. The more we compress it, the more support it's going to provide. Being dynamic helps ensure that it's nice and smooth. We don't have anything abrupt that's just going to, kind of like a jounce bumper would be. When your jounce bumper hits, you know it, because it's a boom, abrupt assist that you get from that, whereas this is going to be gradual and be very smooth. And as well, the other side's attached to it, and since we're bolted on both sides, the other side, while this side wants to compress, the other side is going to extend, and it also wants to return to that normal position, so that's going to help as well, because it wants to retract back to where it was. That's going to minimize the amount of oscillations you have back and forth. And if sway is something you're trying to combat, this, as well as a rear sway bar here, and you can even get one for the front, is going to really help you tame sway on a motorhome. The Sumo Spring is made of a microcellular urethane that's road grime and oil resistant, so you don't have to worry about the various chemicals on your motorhome and out on the roads there deteriorating your spring over time. It's going to provide you with assist for many years to come. You'll get all the bracketry and hardware that you see here, so you've got pretty much everything you need to get it installed. You will need some drill bits, because we do have to drill through the frame, and you are going to need some pretty heavy duty tools because you have to take the wheels off, and they do torque pretty high. Now, before we put our parts on, we're going to go ahead and hit our test course so we can get a baseline of how our motorhome feels. We're going to start by going into the uneven bump section, which is going to simulate hitting a pothole. So we're going to go ahead and hit that now. And this motorhome does a fairly good job of absorbing that impact. We've got a little bit of sway here. You can kind of feel it going on, but it does recover fairly fast. This is one of the better motorhomes out there, as far as ones I've just baseline tested. It does have quite a bit of rock that you can feel going on, and you can kind of see the steering wheel here wants to move around when it hits those bumps. Some things to help combat the steering wheel wanting to move on you is a steering stabilizer. So I really suspect that's going to make some differences there. We do got quite a bit of bounce there, it feels like, in the back as well, and some rear Sumos will help absorb that. And we do got a little bit of sway here in the front, and we can help minimize that with some front Sumos as well. And you could always put sway bars on as well to combat against sway, but if you're really trying to combat against bounce and stuff, then these Sumos are usually a better option. We hit the even bumps course after that, which would simulate pulling into a driveway or a speed bump, and that's where we were talking about the bounce we had in the front and back. So I think we are going to be able to make some pretty good improvements there. That should help the ride quality, as well as the items that are in the back that are kind of bouncing around should help soften those up to extend the life of your various china and other things that you've got back there. We're heading into our slalom section next, and this is where we're going to simulate an evasive maneuver. And this is usually where I see the biggest improvements once we've done with our suspension enhancements, is in our slalom section here. And you want to have the confidence that if something were to run out in front of you, that you'd be able to get out of the way and keep control of your motorhome. So we're going into it now, and we do have some sway. It does feel fairly good. We've got a decent speed going here for such a large motorhome, but it does got some rock. We can hear a few things bouncing around there. It's nothing slamming open real loud, but we could hear some things moving. So we're gonna go ahead and get it back in the shop now. We'll get our enhancements on, and then we'll hit our course once again and see our improvements. And I do expect to see some improvements in just about every aspect. This motorhome does drive good, but we can make it better. We'll begin our installation by first jacking up our motorhome. You can do this using your leveling jacks. That's what we've done here to get our wheels off the ground. So you can see here that it will rotate. We then place jack stands underneath the frame to support it because we don't want to trust just our hydraulic leveling jacks while we're underneath it working. So now we've got it lifted up here, you can see the wheel rotates. We need to remove the hubcap first, and on this motorhome here we've got 2 of the chrome nuts that we need to remove. It's pretty easy to identify which one those 2 are because they do look a little bit different than the other ones. You can kind of see it sticks out just a little bit further than the ones we're not going to be removing. And one of the big tells is if you look for like almost like a crimp spot, there's a little tiny divot right there where it crimps the cap onto the nut. The other ones here, they don't have those. We'll then use a 1 9/16 socket to remove those. Here you can see the nut that's inside, and you can see the little crimp marks on there that show that this one's crimped onto a nut. There's going to be 2 of these on here. They're going to be opposite of one another. Once we get both of those removed, our hubcap will slide off, and then we can set that aside. Next, we need to make sure that we can get this wheel off, so just check for your valve stems. A lot of times your inner wheel is going to pass through one of the holes on your outer rim here, and sometimes it's a rubber gasket and you can push it in, but this is a plastic cup that's molded on there, so we're not going to be able to just push this out. We need to remove this. So just unscrew the cap for the valve stem, and there's a nut behind it. We're going to remove that nut. In most cases it's going to be a 1/2 inch. Now that we've got that nut removed, when we go to take our wheel off here, it's going to slide off. We're not going to be pulling on that or cause any damage. So now we can grab our big impact, and you're going to need a pretty big one because these wheels are torqued to a very high specification. You'll also need a special torque wrench in order to tighten these back down. So this is where you need to ask yourself, hey, am I equipped to do this? If you are not prepared, you need to make sure you go rent the proper tools to do this. Again, we're going to need to torque up to about 500 foot-pounds. So you need to have all the equipment for that, as well as being able to remove these nuts, which are also a very, very high amount of torque. So you can see we're using a pretty big impact here in order to take these off. If you don't have an impact and you're planning on doing this at home with hand tools, it can be done. Before you jack your vehicle up though, you'll want to take that hubcap off and just break each one of these loose about a turn before you jack it up. Otherwise, you're probably never going to get it off without a gun like this. So now we've got our tool here. We're going to use a 1 5/16 socket, and we're going to remove all of these. And I always like to take one nut and just thread it on there a couple of threads, because these are pretty big, heavy wheels, and if they were to fall towards you, you could get hurt by it. So just having a couple of threads on one nut will ensure these can't fall off on you. And then we'll just get the rest removed. So now we've got all those removed, we can come back and remove that one we had on there by hand. That was just our protection while we were taking the other nuts off. So now we're prepared to slide the wheel off. It does just slide off the studs, but it is extremely heavy. So some tools that could assist you is a pry bar. The bigger the better. This one here is a little smaller than I would prefer, but a pry bar works very well for helping you relieve some pressure on the tire and getting these off and maintaining control of it. And then we'll go ahead and bring our tire off. Keep our foot on our plate down here so we have control. And you can see as it drops on there, we can kind of push down on the plate to lift it up. And then we just slide it back right off of there like that. But now we showed you how to use one of the tools designed for it. Here's a method to use a pry bar. This is what I've been doing in the shop for many years before they came out with tools like that. And you just kind of keep some support underneath of it, and you can just kind of work it back and then just drop your tire down, and you just roll it out of the way. The tool definitely makes it a little bit easier. You got a little more control. So now we can prepare our Sumo spring. We've got our area to work in. These are the bolts we're going to use to secure it with. You'll notice on the top of your Sumo spring you'll have 4 holes, 2 of which are close together and 2 of which are far apart. We want the 2 that are far apart. We'll take our upper bracket here. We want the ears to hang down on the sides of our spring. Those will line up with the set of holes that are spaced far apart. And we'll just thread these in here. And then we can tighten these down using a 9/16 socket. Then on bottom, we're also going to place our lower bracket. Now this one here does need to angle a certain way. If we see this little hook here, the way this is going to sit on our vehicle is this hook's going to go right around the U-bolt here, so it's going to sit just like that. So it needs to be in an orientation that's going to line up like that. So I actually find it pretty easy if you just mock it up like that real quick. Grab the bottom here, then flip it over, and you know you've got it in roughly the right location. And then we can grab the bolt, thread it down in the bottom, and snug it down. We are going to angle this so that way we're in a nice parallel path with our upper bracket. And that's that. We've got our brackets prepared, so we can go ahead and set it into place. It's going to go in the same location that we just mocked it up in, just like that there. And then we can take the carriage bolts that come in our kit. These are going to slide down through our lower bracket. They're very long, you can see there. So you might have to come in kind of at an angle to clear your Sumo spring there. And then we've got this clamp bracket here for the bottom. Now this can go on either way. You can put it like this or like this. This is the preferred method as long as you've got enough threads to where after your nut has been tightened down, you're going to have at least 2 to 3 threads protruding past the nut. Now I already kind of mocked it up and you put it on here. We're not going to have 2 full threads. We're only going to have maybe a thread. So we're going to be installing it in this position in order to achieve the correct amount of threads. So just kind of put some downward pressure on your carriage bolts and then start the locking nuts onto each one of the carriage bolts. And then we'll tighten these down with a 9/16 socket. Keep a little bit of downward pressure on your carriage bolt to hold it in the square slot, and that'll keep it from spinning. Once we get close, I like to swap to the other side because we want to tighten them down back and forth so they tighten down evenly. So we've gone ahead and measured 6 inches down from the top of the frame on each side. I just put a small mark next to our upper bracket. Our lower hole here needs to be 6 inches from the bottom of the frame. You also notice you have 3 holes here. We're going to use 2 bolts on each side. Preferably you use the lower and the top hole, but they give you this extra hole here because due to various components and upgrades and aftermarket components that are installed on motorhomes, that you may have some component that's in this location. So you do have that option if you need it. So we're going to go ahead and jack this up until it matches up. I've got a jack underneath the axle here, and we're just going to pump it on up. And that looks pretty good there. Just trying to get it to where we can drill through that hole so it lines up with our mark. Check our other side. Sometimes you got to tap it just a little bit because it has a little bit of friction on it there to get everything to line up the way you need it to. And that looks pretty good right there. So the next step we're going to be drilling out those holes with a 3/8 drill bit, but you need to take a quick peek on the other side of your frame and just verify that there's no components over there that you're going to be drilling into. Now, I've already checked that side on our motorhome here. We've got no accessories there, but even if you have the exact same year, make, and model of motorhome as the one we're working on here, there are so many different optional accessories that could be purchased with that motorhome that you may have accessories there, so you have to check that yourself at home. So now we're just going to use our upper bracket as a template and use our 3/8 drill bit to drill out this hole. We can now take our hardware that we've got the first hole drilled out. I like to do this with each hole because as you're drilling, this thing's going to want to vibrate around, and we want to make sure all of our holes are going to line up when we're all done. So if we do one at a time here, that's going to ensure that all of our bolts are definitely going to fit. On the back side, we're just going to take one of the locking nuts, just reach around to the back side there and just thread it on. I do like to tighten it down as well because that's going to help hold it in this position for us, because again, we are going to get a lot of vibration during drilling. And if we minimize that, it'll just make our job a lot easier in the long run. So we'll take a 9/16 socket and wrench and then snug these down. We'll go ahead now and repeat that process, drilling out the other hole here. We're going to do the top one since we're clear on the other side, but again, if you got some components there, you may need to do the middle one, and we're going to do the top and bottom on the other side as well. So now we've got this side fully tightened down, we can reinstall our wheels in reverse order how we removed them, and we can perform the same procedures over on the other side to get that Sumo spring installed. So now that we've got our enhancements installed, we're going to hit our test course once again to see how they have made improvements. We're going to hit that uneven bumps course first, simulating a pothole. And this motorhome already drove pretty good before, but right when we hit that first pothole, you can definitely notice a pretty big difference. We don't have quite as much sway, and in the steering wheel is where I notice it the most. The impact here in the wheel when I hit that bump, before it had a pretty good jerk to it, it's quite a bit less here in the wheel. So when I'm going down the road, I feel like I'm not going to have to compensate nearly as much now, thanks to our enhancements. We're coming into the even bump section now, and this is going to simulate going over a speed bump or maybe pulling into a driveway. And before we had a little bit of bounce at the back when we would go over these. We still have a little bit of bounce back there, but it does seem like it has reduced it a little bit. And that can help, again, extend the life of our components and keep things from bouncing around as much in our motorhome when we're going down the road. We're gonna head into the slalom section next, and that's usually where I notice the biggest difference when enhancing these motorhomes, because they do tend to have quite a bit of sway if you have to go into an evasive maneuver. So we're going to get up into this section here, and I was feeling pretty confident with this motorhome before, so we're going to have a pretty decent amount of speed with us when we go into that. Some of the other motorhomes I'm kind of creeping going into it because I don't have the confidence. But the goal here is to give you the most confidence as possible so you're comfortable driving your motorhome. So this is actually a pretty good speed, and it feels pretty good. We do have some sway because we are actually at a pretty good speed here. This is pretty aggressive for a motorhome here, and it does have a little bit of sway, but it actually feels very good. This almost feels almost somewhat like driving a van in a way, not so much like a motorhome. And that completes our installation of Sumo springs on the rear axle of our 2020 Thor Outlaw.